Hello, my name is Davy Jones, and welcome to yet another episode of Listen Up's Drive-Thru Bible School. Today, we are going to get into probably the most recent major cult on the scene these days, Scientology. But before I get into that, if you have not enrolled in Drive-Thru Bible School but would like to, please hit the subscribe button as well as the notifications button to be alerted to when new videos are released, typically once a week, sometimes 2 times a week. And then also, if you like this video, please hit the like. It helps us with the algorithms and being able to broadcast this to more people. Of course, feel free to share it. Now, as with all my Drive-Thru Bible School looks at other religions and cults, this is not going to be an in-depth scouring expose of Scientology. And while it is new on the scene, its founder, and its history is really quite bizarre and complicated. Again, so as with all my other videos in the Gospel According to series, this will be an overview. Now, how would you like to be able to control time, space, create universes, and never get sick again? Well, then you may want to consider this multi-billion-dollar cult called Scientology, where for the cost of millions of dollars, if you have it, because if you have it, they'll take it, they will show you a pathway that will lead to those things, or so they claim. If you can't afford millions of dollars to spend on their endless audits, which are highly invasive personal tests that show you that nothing is your fault, there's no sin, but that your inadequacies and problems are the results of not realizing and embracing your godlike self. You can always go for lesser levels of auditing to learn about aliens and how to become immortal the right way is when you join, you're obligated to sign your life away for the next billion years. That is no exaggeration. It is a work contract. More on that in a moment, but let's continue with what Time magazine said of Scientology, quote, ruined lives, lost fortunes, federal crimes. Scientology poses a religion, but is reality a ruthless global scam and is aiming for the mainstream. Now, using Hollywood stars like Tom Cruise, John Travolta, and many others, to corporate bigwigs like billionaire Robert Dugan, who swear by Scientology, helps them promote and recruit for their cult. Now, once they join, the cult saps every deep, dark, personal thing about you. They own you, and you are forced to swear allegiance to them for fear of being exposed publicly. Highly litigious, violently threatening, and driven by power, Scientology is a mind-controlled cult that wants your money, as all cults do. But what it really wants is all of you. They want to own every ounce of your being. And Scientology seems to get people to willingly annul their individuality, their sense of self, and trade in reason for teachings that seem to have been culled from a bad 1950s science fiction movie. But strangely, though, science fiction is the inspiration for this cult, as founded by middling science fiction writer L. Ron Hubbard in Pasadena, California in 1954. Scientology and Dianetics, in fact, growing up, I used to see commercials for Dianetics books all the time. Don't see them on TV that much anymore, if ever. Well, Scientology and Dianetics is the book that gave this movement its start. That's her Bible, and it began as a mental health organization, but on a dare, believe it or not, but on a dare at a cocktail party in Pasadena, California, Hubbard was dared to turn it into a religion, which now enjoys protective status as such under the U.S. Constitution. L. Ron Hubbard. Lafayette Ronald Hubbard, more famously known as L. Ron Hubbard, was born in Nebraska in 1911. And after being denied entrance into the U.S. Naval Academy and failing out of George Washington University, Hubbard struggled to earn a living as an adventure and science fiction writer. He was married a number of times. Later, after selling a few pieces, he had a near-death experience after undergoing a dental procedure that in part inspired Dianetics, his book on the science of the mind. And this is the foundation to Scientology. He claimed his book would ultimately have more impact on people than the Bible. It was initially titled Excalibur, yet it struggled to get published and to earn recognition he felt he deserved. And he wrote at that time, quote, "Foolishly perhaps, but determined nonetheless, I have high hopes of smashing my name into history so violently that it will take a legendary form if all books are destroyed." Speaking of Dianetics. And that goal is the real goal as far as I'm concerned, end quote. He would boast that insanity and suicide followed those who would read Excalibur, such as the power over the mind this book had. With the need to support his family, Hubbard was commissioned as a naval officer in 1941. He commanded 2 ships, being relieved from duty on both of them for being, according to his fitness report, not being fit for independent command. Before leaving the Navy, he spent quite a bit of time in and out of naval hospitals for physical and emotional ailments, and finally he left the service. Once he was discharged, Hubbard abandoned his wife and family and moved to Pasadena, California, into the mansion of Jack Parsons, the founder of Jet Propulsion Laboratories, JPL. They're still in Pasadena. It's one of the leading laboratories for science and engineering in the world. Now, Parsons was an avid occultist and follower of Satanist Aleister Crowley. There, Hubbard became involved with Parsons in conjuring up spirits and goddesses in sexual rituals that they might have sex with spirits and gain power and knowledge. His home, Parsons that is, was renowned for its frequent sexual drug-fueled orgies and black magic in which Hubbard eagerly participated in. Later, Hubbard swindled Parsons out of lots of money. They broke up as friends, and he left the area for a while. Now, it was during this time that Hubbard began having difficulty differing between science fiction of his mind and reality, and thus was born Dianetics in 1949 on paper as a paper on psychological awareness, wellness for everyone. Remember the near-death experience he had earlier in his life? Well, this is the fruit of it. The manuscript was submitted to major medical journals and publishers, but was always rejected. In time, it was published by a science fiction magazine that said Hubbard had found the answers to mental health. Now, Hubbard described Dianetics as, quote, the hidden source of all psychosomatic ills and human aberration when he introduced Dianetics to the world in the 1950s. People would need to undergo audits in order to be cleared of past hurts that impacted one in the present. They would then be free to begin living lives of a higher dimension, unimpeded by traditional Western morals, attaining whatever one wanted. Yes, you control your destiny. You can create success, wealth, and all those natural things, all those things that people love and thirst and lust after. Scientology had become a worldwide movement by the 60s, while also becoming increasingly insular. Battling the federal government with the FBI developing a huge file on Hubbard and his bizarre activities and claims, global governments became increasingly concerned about this man who was considered a mental case. And this pressure fomented paranoia in Hubbard, which caused him to tighten his reins on this movement and its adherents by forcing them to disconnect themselves from any organization or people, including family members, who challenged the claims of Scientology, who appeared adversarial, disruptive, or suppressive. This is classic cult-like behavior. Think Jim Jones. For the late 1960s, he was collecting the equivalent of $140,000 a week from the organization, with millions of dollars from its accounts being sent to banks overseas, such as in Switzerland and elsewhere. Money and control. During the 70s, is still being pursued by the government and Nazis, that's what he would say. And in failing health and due to chain smoking, obesity, and a motorcycle accident, Hubbard and his wife hid in various places across the country, and eventually moved to a plot of ground in Creston, California, where he continued his research and writing. In 1986, Hubbard had a stroke and died a week later. His body was cremated and his ashes scattered in the ocean. His followers said that it was time for him to leave his body so that he may continue his research on another planet, as he no longer needed his body here. Hubbard is the true God of Scientology. The religion centers around him and his doctrines, and he is affectionately and reverently called the source for all things. Even today, Hubbard fundamentalism reigns in everything that is done within the organization, and since his passing, for the most part, David Miscavige has run the cult. Dianetics, the modern science of mental health. This is the foundational book that started Scientology and was an instant success. Within a short time, it had sold a remarkable 55,000 copies and has since sold over 8 million copies globally. Now, they base the number of adherents on this figure, so getting any true numbers from them is an impossibility. They're going to lie anyway. People looking for answers to mental and psychological problems apart from traditional religion found their hopes here, as it didn't preach about sin, righteousness, heaven or hell as a reward, or personal moral responsibility. Auditing groups began popping up all over the country, and of course, it costs lots of money to be audited. Now, people could take personality tests or would take personality tests at these auditing centers to help them understand that nothing is their fault, but past wounds and hurts and bad experience done to them from the present and past lives were a result of engrams, E-N-G-R-A-M-S, that needed to be removed so that a person could be happy and eventually become godlike. The goal is to be clear, which means to be free from these past influences found in the reactive mind, a part of the subconscious. It doesn't exist, folks. There is no reactive mind in all of mental health studies. It's just part of their claim. They are said to have, or Hubbard is said to have been the one to have found it alone. Well, these past influences and pains and sufferings in the reactive mind, they're cleared. These folks are never to be impacted by them again, giving them total dominance over their minds and helping them achieve the next stage of spiritual development, which is called operating thetan. There are various levels of that they're trying to achieve until they can reach complete freedom. Here one becomes a willing and knowing cause over life, thought, matter, energy, space, and time. Godlike, as they move their way ultimately up the spiritual ladder towards the bridge to total freedom. Dianetics has been translated into multiple languages. Hubbard was finally getting the recognition he so badly wanted. Still, the American Psychological Association mocked it, saying it was not supported by empirical evidence, and that mocking continues to these days. It was slammed by nearly every major publication of the day, ridiculing it for having more promises and less evidence than any pages ever written by man. The book and auditing courses were expensive, often costing from hundreds of thousands of dollars up to $1,500 for special editions, and yet the money flowed in. People were willing to give up as much money as was required to be set free from guilt and shame and hurt and pain. Hubbard was known to skim off $50,000 at a time back in the 50s for personal use. Soon, however, the money went, the partnerships fell apart, his marriage broke up, and he began to see Dianetics drifting away into nothingness until another science fiction writer suggested he start a religion. And this Hubbard rebranded Dianetics with spiritual language. He claimed that man is mostly a spiritual being, or a thetan, T-H-E-T-A-N, and created a doctrine based on the concept that the true self of a person was a thetan, an immortal, omniscient, a potentially omnipotent entity who originally had created the universe and all that exists as godlike beings, but had lost their way, getting trapped inside physical bodies. Now, Scientology became the name of the religion on which this was founded and was committed to helping people return to being operating thetans, not just thetans, but operating thetans in that full scope of divinity. In their original state, freed aberrations inherited over millions of years to become God again. Supreme God. What does Scientology teach about a supreme God? Well, it says it has it very loosely, but doesn't really define it. Looking over the material, one could deduce that this organization believes really in pantheism, or the godhood potential of all adherents if they go clear, become operating thetans, and cross the bridge of total freedom. Frankly, whatever and however a Scientologist wants to define God works for them as long as it's not the exclusive God of the Bible, or they'd be a Christian. What's more to explain all that exists, Scientology teaches that what is seen is perceived and is a product of mass thought projection by thetans on an agreed upon reality that they designed while being bored many millions of years ago. That's true. Let me say that again. All that exists, Scientology teaches, is perceived. It is a product of mass thought projection by thetans on an agreed upon reality that they designed while being bored. They needed something to do, so they created this universe and this reality. What's more, the inherent divinity of all thetans allows them to manipulate the universe, create new ones on a whim, or when they get bored again, manipulate reality, controlling all that exists. Other religions might call this psychic powers. Truth then becomes relative, as do laws of nature and science. The Bible teaches that God, who is separate from his creation, made all that exists out of nothing, ex nihilo. They were made for his purpose and good pleasure, and that was primarily to make humankind to have fellowship with him. Amen. What and who is man? Well, mankind wasn't created on the sixth day as the Bible teaches, but are eternal creatures called thetans that merely inhabit bodies. Trillions of years ago, bored thetan spirit beings decided to create universes to play in, and over time got trapped in the flesh in which they now reside, having forgotten how to get back to their original state as gods. Well, I guess you're not very omniscient after all if you forgot how to get back. Millions of years of physical and mental pain and suffering from having lived millions of lives are the root cause of all sickness and mental problems. They teach man has unfortunately become limited in his fleshy housing to believe bad things about himself. The ego needs to be set free for man and humankind to return to the status of thetan gods who can create and control universes at the start, continue on their whims, manipulate, all that. Their teachings have many of the same characteristics as Hinduism does. And I did a video on Hinduism not long ago. To them, man hasn't sinned. I've spoken actually with a number of Scientologists over the years who reject that sin is even such a thing. I asked them about lying. I asked them about lust. I asked them about all these, well, let's just go through the Ten Commandments, and you know what? They just shake their head like this. No, never done it. Of course not. It's the engrams. It's these past effects on them that are responsible, not the self. Dianetics, Scientology, and L. Ron Hubbard could show the way back to infinite creative and spiritual freedom. When a person dies, they're not destined for heaven or hell, but are either relieved of their fleshy prison to realize their true supernatural self, or they get back on that reincarnation wheel until they cross the bridge of total freedom once and for all. Salvation is characterized not as being saved and rescued from God's wrath and eternal hell, from the domain of darkness into the kingdom of God's Son, but in progressing from where one is now in their completely unenlightened state to becoming clear through a long series of deprogramming of engrams that keep the individual in a never-ending state of suffering, lies, and pain, hopefully to then next upwardly navigate various levels of becoming an operating thetan to finally achieve self-realization that one is a God. The occult and Scientology. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Hubbard's fascination with the occult began many years before he took on the dare to create a religion. He claimed that a spirit guide followed and gave him direction throughout most of his life. His fantastical imagination of aliens and science fiction was combined with the dark arts he learned while living with, partying with, having sexual rituals and orgies with Jack Parsons in Pasadena, California. Now, as a reminder, Parsons was a close friend and follower of renowned Satanist Aleister Crowley. By the way, as an aside, one whom Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin fame is also infatuated with. And both Hubbard and Parsons discussed Hubbard was discussed by Crowley and Parsons on many occasions. Parsons believing him to have just this incredible intelligence and insight into the psychic and spiritual realm. Now, combining psychic powers to his Dianetics, his audits, and to the practices of those progressing through Scientology proves that the occult is the core of this false religion. In fact, even Hubbard's son confesses that, quote, black magic is at the very core of Scientology. Closing. Hubbard believed his own lies. The money, power, and worship he gained made it easy for him to do so. He believed his methodology and truths were superior to all mental health options, that it could raise one's IQ, solve mankind's problems, and are rational and proven science, regardless what the scientific community says. The mental health community would disagree, of course, and has for years, but fight against Scientology in the sphere of public opinion, and it's quite possible you will be sued, they're quite litigious, or you will have men in dark suits visit you at a strange hour and threaten you. This is no exaggeration. A friend of mine who wrote an expose on Scientology while living in Los Angeles had this happen to him. He was not the first or the last. In fact, a well-known apologetics ministry exposed the fraud that is Scientology so effectively that they sued him, then bought out his website and scrubbed it of all anti-Scientology info. They're ruthless, folks. This religion leads one away from reality at a brisk pace that people leave their families, give up all their possessions, and submit to total control by the authorities and leadership, namely David Miscavige, so that nearly every moment of their lives is under their control. Many of them work as slaves at the various and many properties owned by the cult across the nation and are not allowed communication with the outside world for fear of, well, being confronted with adversarial viewpoints, truth, pretty much. They become brainwashed, of course. Celebrities like Tom Cruise and John Travolta don't have the same constraints because they are effective evangelists as the happy and successful faces of the cult. Now, one cannot be a Christian and a Scientologist. The worldviews contradict each other, as does each's theology. Looking at Scientology from the outside, it would seem to be such a bizarre philosophy that one would be shocked to think anyone could be a disciple of Hubbard and Dianetics. But sadly, many thousands and thousands of people love the idea of being sinless, without the bloody cross, and being the one in charge of their destiny, or themselves as God. There's so much that I left out in this video, but I hope this gives you a better understanding of this mind control cults, its originator, its founder, and if you know anyone in this cult, please pray for them, try and speak with them, and ask God to rescue them. God can save anybody. His arm is not too short to save. Well, again, my name is Davy Jones. Thank you for being with me on this journey. Look for you next time. God bless you.